In April of 1999, my grandmother was supposed to be taken to do some shopping with my aunt. They did this quite often, as their neighborhoods were right next to each other, and my grandmother was too old to drive. However, my aunt woke up that day with a really bad migraine, and she called my grandmother and said that she wouldn't be able to take her shopping that day. My grandmother says that this is no problem, and that she will take the bus instead. Although my grandmother lives in a relatively quiet area, she still had to cross a few streets to get to the bus stop. While crossing one of these streets, a car comes around the corner and strikes my grandmother, knocking her to the ground. She's rushed to the hospital, while other family members around the area got word and gathered in the hospital's waiting room. Unfortunately, my grandmother never regained consciousness and passed away not long after my mother arrived in town. My father and I took some time off of work and school to help make the funeral arrangements. 2 days went by since the funeral, and we were now back in our hometown, hundreds of miles away. None of us knew at the time, but this would not be the last time we would hear from Grandma. Fast forward to a few months later, in mid-August. I'm 19 years old at this time. My parents decided to spend the day at the local fair, so I'm home by myself. It's a nice sunny day outside, but I'm in my bedroom with the curtains drawn and playing music, being your typical late 90s rebellious teenager. My room had it all: a TV set, an air conditioner, a 5-disc stereo, and one of those new DVD players, along with a PlayStation and a phone. The phone in my room was one of those old-fashioned rotary models. It had one of those famous distinctive ringtones that you sometimes hear in old movies. It was sometime after lunch when the music was interrupted by the sound of the telephone ringing. I promptly, yet begrudgingly, paused the CD player. There was something not quite right about the ringtone. It was noticeably slower. I answered the phone. Yeah? I expected it to be my parents asking me to go grab them from the local fair, but all I heard was the sound of static on the other end. Again I say, hello? Over the static, I heard my grandmother's voice reply, hello? Grandma, is that you? There was no reply, only static. Then the line went dead. I hung up the receiver and just stood there looking at the phone. I'm a little freaked out at this point, so I put the music back on and I try to put the pieces of the last 10 seconds together. The strange ringtone, the static, Grandma's voice. Was someone trying to pull an elaborate prank on me? I try to push my thoughts to one side. An hour later, the phone rings again. This time, however, there is no drawn-out ringtone, nor was there any static when I put the receiver up to my ear. The voice was indeed one of my parents asking me to pick them up from the local fair. This confirmed to me that the phone call I received earlier was definitely something out of the ordinary. I didn't tell anyone about that bizarre phone call for years. I thought it best just to keep this experience to myself forever. But sometimes, things don't always go as planned. 10 years go by, and the year is 2009. By this time, my parents had moved to the same area that my grandmother used to live in. I traveled to go see them for a weekend, and I'm chilling out in the lounge area, watching TV, when my mother asks me, "Has Travis told you about Granny's ghost yet?" No. What's that about?" She then relays a story to me about a freaking encounter involving my brother Travis and our deceased grandmother. His experience happened 4 years after mine, in 2003. My brother lives in a pretty small house. If he farted in his lounge room, you would likely smell it in his bedroom. But I digress. I've always felt a strange energy about his place. His house was built from scratch around the millennium, so it's not some old shitbox with history, or at least it wasn't old at the time of his experience. This is what happened. Travis was home alone one night, sleeping in his bed, when something caused him to wake up. Although it was dark, he saw a ghostly, slightly transparent figure wearing a blue dress standing at the foot of his bed. He looks at the apparition and notices the face of our grandmother. The figure then spoke to him. "There's someone in the lounge." Cool as a cucumber, Travis replied, "Okay, Grandma, I'll go check it out." The apparition then vanished. My brother gets out of his bed and walks the short distance to the lounge room. There's nobody there. He then goes back into his bedroom and falls asleep as if nothing ever happened. How he managed to keep his composure during this experience, I have no idea. He saw the ghost of our grandmother wearing her favorite dress and heard her voice. I would have flipped out big time. Listening to that story resulted in me confessing to my mother about the phone call I received 10 years prior. I thought she would be sad or even a little upset that I kept it to myself for so long. Instead, she was excited and actually smiled, and she wanted to know every detail. My brother and I have not seen the ghost of my grandmother since. We have concluded that the strange phone call was potentially our grandmother looking for closure regarding my mother. I have read stories about telephone circuitry being manipulated for the deceased to contact the living in some rare instances, but we still have not figured out the meaning behind Travis's encounter. This story took place in Bennington, Nebraska, in a newly built home. I was only 7 years old at the time. My room was in the basement. This experience has been with me for years. I will try my best to remember everything as accurately as possible. I understand that memory can sometimes be unreliable, so I will only recall the details that I'm 100% sure of. I never liked staying in the basement, so I always kept the door wide open and the hallway light on. It should be noted that the hallway light illuminated the far wall to the right side of my bed. The day that we moved in, something strange happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, not having to use the bathroom or grab a drink. I woke up out of pure instinct. I instantly noticed a tall silhouette of a woman with shoulder-length hair, standing 2 to 3 feet to the right of my bed. She stood in stark contrast to the backlit wall. I need to stress that she was not just a shadow on the wall. She was a 3-dimensional figure, standing very close to me. The woman was a solid black mass, with no distinguishing features other than her hair. At first, I assumed it was my mother in her robe. "Mom? Hello?" I asked. I got no answer, and the apparition just continued to stand there. I raised my voice, "Mom," but she never replied or even moved. I became frustrated. Why was my mother just standing there watching me? I reached out to touch her, but I felt nothing. It was like trying to touch a hologram. My hand went right through. My 7-year-old brain could not process this. Nothing added up for me. The figure remained as still as a statue. At this time, I was not quite afraid, but I didn't want to leave the bed and go past her. So I rolled back over and went to sleep. This exact same sequence of events happened at least 2 more times in that room. I woke up for no reason and saw a featureless woman in the same spot. I never told anyone about it. I figured that my mom was just sleepwalking or something. Since then, I have had a couple of other experiences, but nothing ever to that extreme. It wasn't until I was much older that I even considered it was something of a paranormal nature. There would be times where I would hyperventilate in my sleep and dream that I was being suffocated. But that all stopped once I moved away. As an adult, I still don't know what exactly happened in that room. The thought that I actually touched a ghost and my hand went right through its dark shape is something that truly unnerves me. This story took place around 5 years ago. I was feeling sick and came home from college early. A little background of my house. My house was located in a heavily forested area, literally in the middle of the woods. The closest neighbors were about 3 miles away. When I got there, I was completely alone. Everyone else was either at school or work. The surrounding forest was noticeably silent. Usually you would hear some birds or a light breeze passing through the trees, but today there wasn't a single noise, and it was unnerving. When I got inside the house, something felt off, but I chalked it up to me just being sick and feeling exhausted from the drive. It was around 3 p.m. when I decided to get some rest. So I got into some comfy clothes and plopped down on the couch, and within seconds I dozed off. About 2 hours later, I woke up to what sounded like footsteps upstairs. I immediately started to panic, knowing that I was still supposed to be alone in the house. But just in case, I texted all of my family and asked each of them if they were home yet. To my dismay, all of them said that they were still out. I thought that maybe I was just hearing things. Perhaps I had a vivid dream or something. Before going back to sleep, I got up and went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. As I was making my way back to the couch, I had to walk past the staircase. The very moment I stepped in front of the stairs, my stomach dropped and my heart skipped a beat. As clear as day, I heard a little girl's voice singing "Mary Had a Little Lamb." I know it sounds cliche, but that's what I heard. If I could give more detail, the voice sounded like it was distorted and echoey. There was something about it that was all wrong. Considering the circumstances, it's safe to say that I've never been so terrified in my life. The voice stopped me in my tracks, and I was frozen to the spot, too afraid to even move. After a minute, I slowly made my way up the stairs and looked into the dark hallway. What the fuck? For this next part, you can chalk it up to me being dumb and having my thoughts all out of order, because I decided to slowly make my way down the hallway and towards the creepy voice. I don't know why, I just felt compelled to do so. I suddenly felt freezing, and an overwhelming sense of dread came over me. I began to shake, and soon I collapsed on the floor. I felt the urge to run, but something was pinning me down. I couldn't tell you if it was an unearthly force or my own primal fear keeping me in place. If I had to compare it to anything, imagine that you're in a canoe in the middle of the ocean, with a shark circling you, waiting for its moment to attack. I suddenly sprung up and charged back down the hallway, nearly falling down the steps as I descended them. I ran outside and just stood there for about 15 minutes before my mom came home and asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't have much of an answer, and I thought that there was no way that she would believe anything I had to say about what just happened to me. So I made up some bullshit excuse and kept the truth to myself. I've yet to experience anything quite like that again. To this day I try to rationalize the event, but to no avail. What bothers me the most is that I was somehow drawn towards the creepy voice instead of running away, which is what I should have done the moment I heard it. I tried to tell myself it was just the spirit of a little girl who played a trick on me. But in the back of my mind, I know that there is a possibility that something more sinister was at work, trying to lure me into its clutches.